The basket felt heavier with each step, though Rose Emerson knew the weight came not from the eggs but from the stairs that followed her down the dusty main street of Tucumcari, New Mexico. She kept her chin high, despite the whispers that trailed behind her like tumbleweeds in the autumn wind of 1883, her worn boots marking a steady rhythm on the wooden boardwalk as she approached the first door of the morning. The sun had barely crested the horizon, painting the desert landscape in shades of amber and gold, and already she could feel the judgment pressing against her skin like the gathering heat of the day. Rose had arrived in Tucumcari 3 months ago with nothing but a carpetbag, a handful of coins, and a past that clung to her like smoke. The townspeople had formed their opinions quickly, as small towns always did. A young woman of 22, traveling alone with no family and no husband, speaking in clipped sentences about where she came from or why she had left. The respectable women pursed their lips when she passed. The men either leered or looked away entirely, depending on whether their wives were watching. The preacher had called on her once, his eyes full of barely concealed suspicion, asking pointed questions about her soul and her circumstances that she had deflected with practiced ease. She had found work initially at the boarding house, scrubbing floors and changing linens, but Mrs. Henderson had let her go after 2 weeks. No explanation given, just a curt dismissal and $2 pressed into her palm. Rose had understood without being told. The other boarders had complained. A woman with her reputation, whatever they imagined it to be, was not suitable company. Desperation had led her to old Miguel Santos, who lived on the outskirts of town with his wife and a coop full of chickens that produced more eggs than 2 elderly people could ever consume. Miguel had kind eyes that reminded Rose of her father before everything had fallen apart back in Kansas. He had offered her a deal. She could take his surplus eggs each day and sell them door to door, keeping half the profits for herself. It was honest work, he had said, and honest work was how a person rebuilt their life. So each morning, Rose filled her basket with fresh eggs, carefully cushioned with straw, and made her rounds through Tucumcari. Most doors remained firmly closed. Some opened just enough for a sharp refusal before slamming shut again. Occasionally, someone would buy an egg or two, usually while looking over their shoulder to see if anyone was watching this small act of commerce with the town's pariah. This particular morning, Rose had managed to sell exactly 3 eggs in 2 hours of walking. Her feet ached, her throat was dry from the dust, and the sun was climbing higher, promising another scorching October day. She stood before the door of the milliner's shop, knowing full well that Miss Pritchard would send her away as she always did, but compelled by stubbornness and necessity to try anyway. The door opened before she could knock. Miss Pritchard's pinched face appeared, her mouth already forming the word no, when a figure on horseback caught Rose's attention. A cowboy was dismounting outside the general store across the street, tall and lean, moving with the kind of easy confidence that came from a life spent outdoors. Even from a distance, Rose could see the sun-weathered quality of his face beneath the shadow of his hat, the way his hand rested naturally on the rope coiled at his saddle. "I said no," Miss Pritchard repeated, sharper this time, and Rose jerked her attention back. "Yes, madam." "I apologize for disturbing you." The door shut with unnecessary force. Rose adjusted her grip on the basket and turned, intending to head toward the residential streets on the north end of town, when she nearly collided with the cowboy. He had crossed the street with surprising speed, and now stood directly in her path, his gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Pardon me, madam," he said, his voice a low drawl that spoke of Texas or perhaps further south. I couldn't help but notice you're selling eggs." Rose blinked, momentarily off balance. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. There was a scar along his right cheekbone, white against his tanned skin, and his hands, she noticed, were calloused but clean. "I am," she managed, finding her voice. "Fresh this morning. 5 cents each. How many you got there?" Rose glanced down at her basket. After selling 3, she had started the day with 2 dozen. 21. The cowboy reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather coin purse. He counted out coins with deliberate care, then held them out to her. "I'll take all of them." Rose stared at the money in his palm, then up at his face, searching for the joke, the catch, the cruel twist that would reveal this as some new form of humiliation. But his expression remained serious, almost solemn, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like understanding. "All of them," she repeated, needing to be certain. "Everyone. That's $1.05 if my arithmetic is right. But what will you do with 21 eggs?" The question escaped before she could stop it, born of genuine bewilderment rather than suspicion. The corner of his mouth lifted in something that was not quite a smile. "I'll figure something out. Maybe make the world's largest omelet." Rose felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. She carefully transferred the eggs from her basket to his outstretched arms, watching as he cradled them with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. The coins passed from his hand to hers, warm from his pocket, and their fingers brushed for the briefest moment. "Thank you," she said softly, and meant it with a depth that surprised her. He nodded, still holding her gaze. "Name's Ethan Jones. I work at the Double J Ranch about 5 miles east of town. Rose Emerson. Miss Emerson." He touched the brim of his hat with his free hand, a gesture of respect that she had not received in this town since her arrival. "I expect I'll be seeing you again. I have a powerful appetite for eggs." Then he was gone, walking back across the street with his improbable armload of eggs, leaving Rose standing on the boardwalk with $1.05 clutched in her hand, and a strange warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the desert sun. That evening, as she sat in her tiny rented room above the saddle shop, counting and recounting her day's earnings, Rose allowed herself to wonder about Ethan Jones. The Double J Ranch was owned by Jack Jernigan, a cattle baron with a reputation for running a tight operation and treating his men fairly. Cowboys came and went through Tucumcari regularly, stopping for supplies or whiskey or entertainment, but Rose had never paid them much attention. They were just part of the landscape, like the sagebrush and the distant mountains. But Ethan Jones had looked at her differently, not with the leering interest of men who saw a woman alone and assumed the worst, not with the cold judgment of the townspeople who had decided she was somehow less than decent. He had looked at her like she was simply a person conducting honest business, worthy of basic courtesy and respect. It was probably nothing, Rose told herself as she lay down on her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the town settling into night. A momentary kindness from a stranger, nothing more. He would not come back. Men like him, good men with steady work and clean consciences, did not tangle themselves up with women like her, women whose pasts were mysteries, and whose presents were built on the charity of an old Mexican man and a coop full of chickens. But the next morning, when Rose arrived at Miguel's small adobe house to collect her eggs, the old man was smiling. "I hear you sold all your eggs yesterday," he said, his accent softening the edges of his words. "This is very good, Rose, very good." "A stroke of luck," Rose replied, though she could not quite keep the smile from her own face. I doubt it will happen again. She was wrong. When she reached the center of town, her basket full of fresh eggs, Ethan Jones was already waiting outside the general store, leaning against a post with his hat tipped back and that same serious expression on his face. When he saw her, he straightened and crossed the street. "Morning, Miss Emerson, Mr. Jones." Rose's heart was beating faster than it had any right to. "I did not expect to see you again so soon. Told you I had a powerful appetite for eggs." He glanced at her basket. "How many today?" 24. "I'll take them all." The transaction proceeded as it had the day before, coins exchanged for eggs, fingers brushing briefly in the transfer. But this time, when Ethan cradled the eggs in his arms, he did not immediately walk away. Instead, he looked at her with an expression that seemed to be weighing something, considering some internal question. "Miss Emerson, I hope you won't think me too forward, but I was wondering if you might tell me where you buy your coffee. The ranch cook makes it strong enough to strip paint, and I'm in the market for something more civilized." It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it. Coffee was coffee, available at any general store, all sourced from the same suppliers. But Rose found herself responding with the same careful courtesy. "I get mine from Henderson's store, the small one on the East End. They have several varieties. Much obliged. I'll have to stop by there." He paused, then added, "Would you think it strange if I asked which variety you prefer?" "The Brazilian blend," Rose heard herself say. "It is more expensive but worth it for the smoothness. I'll keep that in mind." This time, his almost smile reached his eyes, creating small lines at the corners that suggested he did not smile often, but when he did, he meant it. "I suspect I'll need more eggs tomorrow as well. Would you be coming into town the same time?" "I will be here," Rose confirmed, her voice steadier than her pulse, and so a pattern established itself. Each morning, Rose would arrive in town with her basket of eggs, and Ethan would be waiting. He bought every egg, every single one, day after day. On the third morning, he brought her a cup of coffee, the Brazilian blend, prepared the way she liked it. On the fourth morning, he asked if she would mind walking with him to the livery stable while he checked on his horse, and Rose found herself saying yes, found herself falling into step beside him while the townspeople stared and whispered. "They are talking about us," Rose said quietly as they walked, acutely aware of the eyes following them. "Let them talk." Ethan's voice was calm, unbothered. "People always need something to talk about. Might as well give them something harmless." "You do not know me," Rose said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "You do not know anything about me or why I came here or what I might have done before, yet you are willing to let your reputation be connected to mine." Ethan stopped walking. They were between buildings now, in a slice of shade that provided temporary relief from the morning sun. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. "You're right. I don't know your past, but I know what I see. I see a woman working an honest job, trying to make her way in a town that's decided to make that as hard as possible. I see someone who shows up every morning with her head high, even though she knows she'll face closed doors and cold shoulders. That tells me more about your character than any rumor or gossip ever could." Rose felt something crack open inside her chest, some protective shell she had built around herself. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. "Because I know what it's like to be judged for things outside your control. Because kindness costs nothing, and this town seems to have forgotten that. And because," he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words, then continued, "because from the first moment I saw you standing there with your basket and your dignity, refusing to bow under the weight of their scorn, I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever seen." Rose could not speak. Her throat had closed around words that wanted to escape, feelings she had no right to feel. She had known this man for only 4 days. 4 days of brief morning encounters, of simple transactions and slowly lengthening conversations. It was not enough time to trust someone. It was not enough time to let down her guard. But when Ethan reached out and gently took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers, Rose did not pull away. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly, "and I will. Tell me I'm overstepping, and I'll go back to just buying eggs with nothing more than a polite good morning. But if you're willing, Miss Emerson, I'd like to spend more time with you. I'd like to know you properly." "The town will crucify you," Rose said, even as her fingers tightened around his. "Your employer might dismiss you. Your friends will question your judgment. Then they were never really friends to begin with." Ethan's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, Rose. I'm just asking if I can walk you home sometimes. Maybe sit with you while you have your coffee. Get to know who you are when you're not busy being brave." Rose looked up at him, this cowboy who had appeared in her life like something out of a dream, too good to be real, too kind to be trusted. But his eyes were steady and honest, and his hand in hers felt like an anchor, like something solid she could hold onto in a world that had been shifting beneath her feet for far too long. "My past is complicated," she said finally, "and painful, and I am not ready to talk about it." "That's all right, I'm a patient man. I came here to start over, to be someone different than who I was before. We all got the right to remake ourselves. That's what the West is for, isn't it?" Rose took a deep breath, then nodded. "You can walk me home. After you finish checking on your horse." The smile that spread across Ethan's face was like sunrise, warming and bright. He gave her hand one more gentle squeeze before releasing it, and they continued walking toward the livery stable, side by side, while Tucumcari whispered around them. Over the following weeks, Ethan became a constant in Rose's life. He bought her eggs every morning without fail, and most days he would walk with her afterward, either through town or along the quieter roads that led toward Miguel's house. He told her about his life on the ranch, about the cattle drives he had been on, about growing up in a small Texas town with 3 brothers and a mother who had taught him to respect women and value honesty above all else. His father had died when Ethan was 16, thrown from a horse during a storm, and Ethan had taken on the role of man of the house, working hard to help support his family until his brothers were old enough to make their own ways. Rose listened to these stories, treasuring each detail, building a picture of this man who had chosen to see her as worthy of his time and attention. She told him smaller things about herself, carefully edited truths that skirted around the painful center of her history. She spoke of growing up in Kansas, of loving to read despite having limited access to books, of her skill with numbers and her dream of one day owning a small business of her own. She did not tell him about her father's drinking, about the debts that had accumulated, about the man her father had promised her to in payment. She did not tell him about the night she had run, stealing away in darkness with nothing but what she could carry, knowing she was destroying what little remained of her family's honor, but unable to bear the alternative. Ethan never pushed. He seemed content to learn her in layers, to accept what she offered and wait patiently for more. He had a quiet way about him, a steadiness that Rose found deeply comforting. He was quick to smile but slow to anger, thoughtful in his words and gentle in his actions. When they walked, he naturally positioned himself on the side closer to the street, a small gesture of protection. When she shivered in the increasingly cool November air, he draped his jacket over her shoulders without comment. When she stumbled on a rough patch of road, His hand was there to steady her, and it stayed there, holding hers for the rest of the walk. The town's opinion of their growing closeness was predictably harsh. Mrs. Henderson made a point of telling Ethan, within Rose's hearing, that he was making a fool of himself over a woman of questionable character. The preacher delivered a sermon about the dangers of temptation and the importance of maintaining moral standards. Several of the ranch hands gave Ethan grief, though never in a way that crossed the line into true disrespect. They valued their jobs too much for that. Ethan weathered it all with the same calm patience he brought to everything else. Noise, he called it. Just noise from people who have nothing better to do with their time. But Rose worried. She saw how some of the shopkeepers now treated Ethan with less warmth, how some of the respectable families no longer greeted him on the street. He was paying a social price for his association with her, and while he claimed not to care, Rose could not help but feel guilty. "You should stop," she told him one morning in late November as they sat together on a bench outside the closed bakery, sharing a bag of dried apples Ethan had brought. The air was crisp and cold, hinting at the winter to come, and Rose had wrapped herself in the shawl Miguel's wife had given her. "You should stop buying my eggs every day. Stop walking with me. Let people see that you have come to your senses." Ethan stopped mid-chew and turned to look at her, his expression shifting from relaxed to serious. "Is that what you want? It is what is sensible. That's not what I asked." He set the bag of apples aside and shifted on the bench to face her more fully. "Do you want me to stop, Rose? Because if you do, if you're uncomfortable or if I've misread this situation, then I will. But don't ask me to leave for the sake of what other people think." "I care about what happens to you," Rose said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have a good life here, a good job. I am not worth losing that over. Let me be the judge of what you're worth." Ethan's hand found hers, his fingers lacing through hers with familiar ease. "And for the record, I think you're worth considerably more than anything this town has to offer. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're kind to Miguel and his wife, that you thank them every morning even though you've been doing this for months. I know you're honest in your business, that you've never once tried to sell a bad egg or cheat someone on the count. I know you read poetry when you think no one is watching, and that you have a soft spot for stray dogs, and that you cry at beautiful sunsets even though you try to hide it." Rose felt her cheeks flush. She had not realized he had noticed so much, had been watching her so carefully. "Those are small things. Small things add up to big things, and all of them together tell me you're a good person, Rose Emerson. A person I want to keep knowing, keep spending time with, he stopped himself, shaking his head slightly. "I'm getting ahead of myself. But the point is, I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to go." Rose looked at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was tracing slow circles on her wrist, and felt the walls she had built around her heart continuing to crumble. "I do not want you to go," she admitted. "I look forward to seeing you every morning. I think about you when we are apart. You make me feel like maybe I can have a future that's different from my past, like maybe I deserve good things after all." "You do deserve good things." Ethan's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch feather-light, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she did not, he leaned closer, his eyes searching hers. "You deserve all the good things, Rose." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and sweet, barely more than a brush of lips. But it sent warmth flooding through Rose's entire body, made her heart race and her breath catch. When Ethan pulled back, his eyes were soft and wondering, like he had discovered something precious. "Been wanting to do that for weeks," he murmured. "I am glad you finally did," Rose whispered back. And when he smiled, she leaned forward and kissed him again, less tentatively this time, with more certainty. They were so absorbed in each other that they did not notice the figure watching from across the street, did not see the disapproving shake of a head or hear the muttered words. But the town noticed. The town always noticed. That evening, as Rose was closing up her small room for the night, someone slipped a note under her door. The message was brief and brutal. "Leave town before you corrupt any more decent men. You are not wanted here." Rose sat on her bed, holding the paper with shaking hands, feeling the old fears rise up like ghosts. She had run once before, fled into the night to escape a fate she could not bear. Was she destined to keep running forever? To never find a place where she could simply exist without judgment, without scorn? She thought of Ethan, of his steady gray eyes and his patient kindness, of the way he looked at her like she mattered, like she was worthy of his time and his care and his affection. Could she build something real with him? Or would her past inevitably catch up with her, destroying whatever happiness she managed to create? Rose did not sleep well that night. She lay awake, listening to the wind rattle her window, turning possibilities over in her mind like stones in a river. By morning, she had made a decision. She would tell Ethan the truth. All of it. He deserved to know who he was involving himself with, what kind of scandal might follow her. And if he chose to walk away afterward, well, at least she would have been honest. At least she would have given him the choice her father had denied her. When she met Ethan the next morning, he took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Rose handed him the note. She watched his expression darken as he read it, saw his jaw tighten with anger. "Who left this?" "I do not know. It could have been anyone." Rose wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the morning sun. "Ethan, I need to tell you something about why I came here, about what I left behind. You don't owe me explanations, Rose." "Yes, I do. Because you are putting yourself at risk for me, and you deserve to know the truth." They walked away from the center of town, out toward the scrub-covered hills where they could have privacy. When they found a flat rock to sit on, Rose took a deep breath and began to speak. She told him about her father, about the gambling and the drinking that had started after her mother died, about the debts that had piled up, the creditors who had come calling, the way their lives had slowly unraveled. She told him about Marcus Aldridge, a wealthy man 20 years her senior, who had offered to clear her father's debts in exchange for her hand in marriage. "I said no," Rose continued, her voice steady even as tears gathered in her eyes. "I told my father I would not marry him, that I would rather work my fingers to the bone than become the property of a man who looked at me like I was a thing he had purchased. But my father had already made the deal. He had taken Aldridge's money, and Aldridge expected me to honor the arrangement." Ethan's hand found hers, squeezing tightly, but he said nothing, letting her continue. "The night before the wedding was to take place, I ran. I took what little money I had hidden away, packed a bag, and left in the middle of the night. I traveled for weeks, working odd jobs, staying in cheap boarding houses, always moving west. I thought if I could get far enough away, I could start over. I could be someone new, but the shame followed me. People can sense it somehow, that I am a woman who ran from an obligation, who brought dishonor to her family. I do not know if my father is still alive. I do not know if Aldridge is looking for me. I only know that I could not go through with a marriage that would have killed something essential in my soul." Rose finally looked at Ethan, bracing herself for judgment, for disappointment, for the moment when he would realize she was not worth the trouble. But what she saw in his eyes was not judgment. It was fury, hot and protective, directed not at her but at the men who had tried to use her as a bargaining chip. "Your father sold you," Ethan said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Like you were cattle or property. He was desperate." "That's no excuse. And this Aldridge bastard trying to buy a wife, expecting you to just accept it. Ethan stood abruptly, pacing a few steps away before turning back. You did the right thing, Rose, the only thing. You should never feel ashamed for saving yourself. But I dishonored my family. I broke a promise my father made. Your father had no right to make that promise. Ethan came back to her, kneeling in front of the rock so they were eye level. Listen to me. What happened to you was wrong. Your father was wrong. Aldridge was wrong. You were right to leave. You were brave to leave. And anyone who judges you for it can go straight to hell. The fierceness in his voice, the absolute certainty, broke something open in Rose. The tears that had been gathering finally spilled over, and she found herself crying in earnest for the first time since she had fled Kansas. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her while she wept, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soothing words she could not quite make out through the sound of her own sobs. When the tears finally subsided, Rose pulled back, embarrassed by her loss of control. I am sorry. I did not mean to break down like that. Don't apologize. God knows you've earned the right to cry. Ethan used his thumb to wipe away the remaining tears from her cheeks. Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with that. Does it change things? Between us? Only in that now I understand why you're so guarded, why you expect the worst from people. Ethan's hands framed her face, his touch gentle but firm. But Rose, it doesn't change how I feel about you. If anything, it makes me admire you more. You survived something terrible and you're still here, still fighting, still moving forward. That takes a strength most people never have to find. I do not feel strong. I feel like I am barely holding together. Strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about putting yourself back together afterward. Ethan leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. And you don't have to hold yourself together alone anymore. Let me help. Let me be someone you can lean on. Rose closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of him, leather and soap and something uniquely Ethan. What if Aldridge finds me? What if there are consequences for what I did? Then we'll face them together. But Rose, it's been months. If he was going to come after you, he likely would have by now. Rich men don't like to look foolish, chasing after a woman who doesn't want them. My guess is he wrote you off as a loss and moved on. I hope you are right. Even if I'm not, even if he does show up, you're not alone anymore. You've got Miguel and his wife. You've got me. We'll protect you. The simple certainty in his words made Rose feel safer than she had in months. She opened her eyes and looked at this cowboy who had bought all her eggs, who had stood by her against the town's scorn, who now knew her darkest secret and had not flinched. I think I am falling in love with you, she whispered. Ethan's smile was slow and warm. I think I've been in love with you since you first tried to sell Miss Pritchard an egg, all dignity and determination. Just been waiting for you to catch up. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Rose let herself fall into it, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. Could have him. Could have a future that was not defined by her past. As December arrived and the weather turned colder, Ethan and Rose's relationship deepened. He began taking her to places outside of Tucumcari, borrowing a horse and buggy from the ranch so they could ride out into the desert together, away from prying eyes. They would pack a lunch and spend hours talking, sharing stories and dreams, learning each other's quirks and habits. Ethan told her about his hope to one day have his own small ranch, nothing grand, just a few acres with cattle and maybe some horses. Rose confessed her dream of opening a bakery, using her skill with numbers to run a successful business. We could do both, Ethan said one afternoon as they sat beneath a gnarled juniper tree, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. A ranch and a bakery. Sell eggs and bread and cattle all together. Rose laughed, the sound coming easier now than it once had. That would be quite the enterprise. Why not? People need food. We'd provide it. Seems straightforward to me. Ethan was lying on his back, his hat over his face to shield his eyes, but Rose could hear the smile in his voice. You make it sound so simple. Most things are simple if you break them down enough. You find something people need, you provide it well, you treat folks fairly, and you build from there. He lifted his hat to peer at her. Of course, it works better if you have a partner, someone smart and capable and good with numbers. Are you proposing a business partnership, Mr. Jones, among other things? Ethan sat up, suddenly serious. Rose, I know we haven't been courting long by conventional standards, but I also know what I feel. I know I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to face whatever comes our way, good or bad, together. Rose's heart was racing. Ethan, I'm not asking yet, he interrupted gently. I know you need more time. I know you're still healing from what happened in Kansas, but I want you to know my intentions. I'm courting you with marriage in mind, Rose. I'm all in. And whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Rose reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I want that too, the life you described. I am just afraid of wanting it too much, afraid it will be taken away. Nothing's guaranteed in this life, but I can promise you I'll do everything in my power to make you happy, to keep you safe, to be the kind of man you deserve. You already are that man, Rose said softly. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, and Rose allowed herself to imagine it. A future with Ethan. A home they built together. Maybe children someday if they were blessed. It seemed too perfect, too good to be true, but for the first time she let herself believe it might be possible. The town's attitude toward them remained hostile, but it had settled into a cold disapproval rather than active antagonism. People avoided them but did not actively harass them. Rose continued to sell her eggs, though now only to Ethan and a handful of others who had slowly, grudgingly, decided that maybe she was not the corrupting influence they had imagined. Miguel and his wife had become like family, inviting both Rose and Ethan to their home for meals, treating them with the warmth the rest of Tucumcari refused. Christmas approached, and with it came a surprise. Ethan's mother and youngest brother were coming to visit from Texas, planning to spend the holiday season at the ranch. Jack Jernigan, Ethan's employer, had given permission and seemed pleased at the prospect of having a woman's touch around the place for a few weeks. I want you to meet them, Ethan told Rose as they walked through the cold December morning. I've written to my mother about you. She's eager to know the woman who's captured my attention. Rose felt a flutter of nervousness. What did you tell her about me? The truth. That you're smart and kind and brave, that you make me happier than I've been in years, that I intend to marry you if you'll have me. Ethan, Rose stopped walking, her cheeks flushing. You told your mother you wanted to marry me, of course. Why would I hide it? He looked genuinely puzzled by her reaction. Because we have not been courting that long. Because she might think I am taking advantage of you, or that I am not good enough for you. Ethan pulled her close, right there on the main street, not caring who saw. My mother is going to love you. And if she doesn't, which I find impossible to imagine, it won't change how I feel. But Rose, you're going to meet her, and within 5 minutes you'll understand why I turned out the way I did. She's the strongest woman I know. Present company accepted. Rose wanted to believe him, but the anxiety persisted. Meeting Ethan's family felt significant, like crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. If his mother disapproved, if she convinced Ethan that Rose was not suitable, would he listen? Would he choose family over her? As if reading her thoughts, Ethan tipped her chin up so she was looking directly at him. "Stop worrying. Everything will be fine. Better than fine." Martha Jones arrived 2 days before Christmas, along with Ethan's brother Samuel, who was 19 and full of youthful energy. Martha was a handsome woman in her early 50s, with silver threading through her dark hair and eyes the same steady gray as her son's. She was shorter than Rose had expected, barely reaching Ethan's shoulder, but there was a strength in the way she carried herself that commanded respect. Ethan had arranged for them all to meet at Miguel's house, neutral ground where Rose would feel more comfortable. When Martha entered and saw Rose, she paused, her gaze assessing but not unkind. Then she crossed the room and took Rose's hands in hers. "So you're the young woman who has my son writing letters full of poetry," Martha said, her voice warm with humor. "I'm pleased to finally meet you, Rose." "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Jones. Ethan has told me so much about you." "All good, I hope, though knowing my son, he probably exaggerated my virtues." Martha squeezed Rose's hands before releasing them. "He also told me you've had a hard time in this town, that people have not been kind." Rose glanced at Ethan, unsure how much he had shared. "The town has been cautious of me. I am an outsider and people are naturally suspicious." "Nonsense," Martha said briskly. "People are cruel when they're scared or bored, and small towns tend to be full of both. But cruelty reflects on the person giving it, not the person receiving it. Don't let their small-mindedness make you feel small, dear." The tightness in Rose's chest eased slightly. Martha's straightforward manner was oddly comforting, her lack of pity refreshing after months of whispers and judgment. Over the next few days, as they all celebrated Christmas together, Rose found herself relaxing into the warmth of Ethan's family. Martha was sharp-witted and kind, full of stories about Ethan's childhood that made him groan and Rose laugh. Samuel was enthusiastic and friendly, treating Rose like she was already part of the family. They exchanged simple gifts. Rose had knitted Ethan a warm scarf, and he gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal for writing. Martha gave Rose a delicate silver locket that had belonged to her own mother. "Every woman should have something precious that's just hers," Martha said as she helped Rose fasten it around her neck. "And I hope you'll think of us as family now, Rose, because I can see how much you mean to my son, and anyone who makes him that happy is family to me." Rose's eyes filled with tears, the good kind this time. "Thank you. You have no idea how much that means to me." "I think I do, dear. I think I do." On Christmas night, after dinner at Miguel's house where they had all gathered, Ethan asked Rose to walk with him. They bundled up against the cold and strolled through Tucumcari, now quiet and peaceful under a blanket of stars. The town looked almost beautiful in the darkness, its sharp edges softened by night. They ended up at the church, closed now but with candles still glowing in the windows from the evening service. Ethan led Rose around to the back, where a small garden had been planted, dormant now in winter but still peaceful. "Rose," Ethan began, then stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. He took both her hands in his, and even through their gloves she could feel the warmth of him. "I know I said I would wait, that I wouldn't push you. But standing here with you, after spending these last few days watching you with my family, seeing how perfectly you fit into my life, I can't wait any longer." Rose's breath caught as Ethan released one of her hands to reach into his pocket. He pulled out a simple gold band, nothing elaborate but beautiful in its understated elegance. "This was my grandmother's ring. My mother brought it with her, hoping I might have use for it. Rose Emerson, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. I love how you make me laugh and how you challenge me to be better. I love the future I see when I look at you. Will you marry me?" Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice in saying yes?" Rose looked at the ring, then at Ethan's face, illuminated by starlight and the distant glow of candles. She thought about everything she had run from, everything she had survived. She thought about the woman she had been in Kansas, trapped and desperate, and the woman she was becoming here in New Mexico, finding her strength and her voice. And she thought about this man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had valued her when she was scorned, who had loved her despite every reason the world gave him not to. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." The kiss Ethan gave her was full of joy and promise and relief. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, even through her glove, Rose felt the weight of it like a benediction, like a declaration that she belonged somewhere finally, that she belonged with someone. They were married in January, on a cold, clear morning when the sun turned the desert landscape into a sea of gold. Miguel and his wife stood as witnesses, along with Martha and Samuel. The preacher, though disapproving, performed the ceremony because Martha Jones had a way of making her expectations clear that even stubborn men respected. The town turned out to watch, some curious, some judgmental, but Rose found she did not care. She was wearing a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her make, holding a small bouquet of dried flowers and looking at Ethan like he hung the moon. When Ethan promised to love and honor her, his voice was steady and sure. When Rose promised the same, she meant it with every fiber of her being. And when they were declared man and wife and Ethan kissed her in front of God and everyone, Rose felt something settle deep in her soul. She was home. Finally, truly home. They moved into a small house on the edge of the ranch property, a two-room structure that Ethan had been fixing up for weeks. It was simple but clean, with a good stove and sturdy furniture and windows that let in plenty of light. Rose hung curtains she had sewn herself and arranged the few possessions she owned, marveling at the fact that she had a home of her own, a place where she was wanted and welcomed. Married life suited them both. Ethan worked long days on the ranch, but he always came home to Rose, tired but happy to see her. Rose continued selling eggs for Miguel, though now she had other customers as well, people who had slowly come around to accepting her. She also began baking bread and selling that too, her skills earning grudging respect even from those who still whispered about her past. In March, Rose discovered she was pregnant. The realization came with a complicated mix of emotions: joy at the prospect of a child, fear about whether she would be a good mother, anxiety about bringing a baby into a world that could be so harsh. But when she told Ethan, his reaction was pure, uncomplicated happiness. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then set her down carefully as if she were suddenly made of glass. "We're having a baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "We're going to be parents. Are you happy?" Rose asked, needing to hear it. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. "Rose, this is everything I wanted. You, a home, a family. It's more than I ever thought I'd have." The pregnancy was not easy. Rose suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and as summer approached, the heat made her uncomfortable and swollen. But Ethan was patient and attentive, bringing her cool water, sitting with her during the worst of it, rubbing her aching feet at night. Martha came to visit in July, staying for several weeks to help prepare for the baby's arrival, and to offer the kind of practical advice only an experienced mother could provide. "You're going to be wonderful at this," Martha told Rose one evening as they sat together on the porch, enjoying the slight cooling that came with sunset. "I can see how much love you already have for this child. That's the most important thing. What if I make mistakes? What if I am like my father, unable to cope when things get hard? "You're nothing like your father," Martha said firmly. "Your father made choices that hurt you. You've made choices that protected yourself and others. That's the difference. And yes, you'll make mistakes. Every parent does. But you'll also have Ethan, and you'll have me, and you'll have that stubborn strength that got you through everything else. This baby is lucky to have you." Rose felt tears prick her eyes, as they often did these days, her emotions running close to the surface. "Thank you for accepting me, for treating me like I belong in your family. You do belong. From the moment Ethan brought you into his life, you belonged." Martha took Rose's hand, her grip strong and reassuring. "And I'm grateful to you, Rose, for making my son happier than I've ever seen him, for giving him a reason to dream about the future. That's a gift beyond measure." The baby came in late September, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and drummed against the roof. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Martha and a midwife from town who was professional if not warm. Ethan paced outside, occasionally allowed in to hold Rose's hand and murmur encouragement, then banished again when the midwife declared he was more hindrance than help. Finally, as dawn was breaking and the storm was clearing, the baby arrived. A boy, healthy and loud, with a surprisingly thick shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. When the midwife placed him in Rose's arms, she felt a surge of love so powerful it was almost frightening. This tiny person, this perfect little life, was hers to protect and nurture and love. Ethan was allowed back in, and when he saw his son for the first time, tears streaked his face. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Rose, he's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Rose asked. Though they had discussed this before, she wanted Ethan to decide now that their son was real and present. "James," Ethan said immediately. "James Edward Jones, after your father and mine. A new beginning for a name that deserves better associations." Rose felt emotion well up again. Naming their son after her father, despite everything, felt like a kind of forgiveness, a way of acknowledging that people were complicated and flawed but still worthy of being remembered. "James Edward Jones," she repeated. "Jamie." As the months passed, their small family found its rhythm. Jamie was a good baby, quick to smile and generally content unless he was hungry. Rose discovered that motherhood, while exhausting, suited her. She loved the weight of her son in her arms, the milky smell of him, the way his face lit up when he saw her or Ethan. The town's attitude toward her had shifted significantly since the wedding, and even more so after Jamie's birth. It was harder to ostracize a mother with a baby, harder to maintain harsh judgments when confronted with something as innocent as a child. Rose began to make friends, tentatively at first. There was Ellen Morrison, whose husband worked on the same ranch as Ethan, and who had a daughter just a few months older than Jamie. There was Sarah Chen, who ran the town's small Chinese restaurant with her husband, and who appreciated Rose's head for numbers when helping with the books. Slowly, carefully, Rose built a community around herself, a network of women who valued her for who she was rather than judging her for who she had been. Ethan thrived as a father. He would come home from long days working cattle and immediately reach for his son, playing with him, talking to him, making silly faces that sent Jamie into peals of laughter. He was patient with the sleepless nights and the crying, always ready to take a turn so Rose could rest. They were partners in every sense of the word, sharing the work and the joy equally. As Jamie's first birthday approached, Ethan came home one evening with news. "Jack wants to sell me 20 acres on the eastern edge of the property. Says I've been a good foreman and he wants to help me get started with my own place. The price is fair, more than fair really. If we save hard for the next year, we could afford it." Rose's heart leaped. Their own land, the beginning of the dream they had discussed. 20 acres would be enough for a small herd and a house, a bigger house than this one. And maybe a bakery, Ethan added, his eyes sparkling. A small one just for you to start. We could build it up slowly. They began planning in earnest, sitting up late at night after Jamie was asleep, drawing sketches of what they wanted, calculating costs, dreaming aloud. It felt impossible and inevitable all at once, this future they were building together. In May, 2 years after Rose had first arrived in Tucumcari, a stranger rode into town. Rose was at the general store with Jamie on her hip when she saw him, a well-dressed man in his 40s, looking around with the entitled air of someone used to having his way. Something about him made her stomach clench with instinctive fear, though she could not say why. She finished her shopping quickly and hurried home, telling herself she was being paranoid. But that evening, when Ethan returned from work, his face was grim. "A man came to the ranch today asking about you. Older fellow, fancy clothes, gave his name as Marcus Aldridge." Rose felt the blood drain from her face. Jamie was playing on a blanket at her feet, and she had to lock her knees to keep from swaying. "He is here," she whispered. "After all this time he found me." Ethan was at her side instantly, his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. "What does he want?" "I do not know. Nothing good." Rose looked up at Ethan, fear warring with anger in her chest. "I will not go with him. I will not let him take me back. I will not." "No one is taking you anywhere." Ethan's voice was hard, protective. "You're my wife, the mother of my child. Whatever claim he thinks he has, it's long since invalid. He paid my father. He will say I owe him, that I broke a contract." "A contract for what?" "For you to be sold like property." "That's not legal, Rose. And even if it were, you're married now. You're under my protection, and I'll be damned if I let some rich bastard from Kansas take you away from your family." A knock at the door made them both freeze. Ethan squeezed Rose's shoulders once, then moved to answer it, positioning himself between the door and his family. When he opened it, Marcus Aldridge stood on the porch, his expression a mix of triumph and displeasure. "Mr. Jones, I presume. I'm Marcus Aldridge. I believe you know why I'm here." "I know you're trespassing. This is private property and you're not welcome." Aldridge's smile was thin and cold. "I'm simply here to retrieve what belongs to me. Rose Emerson was promised to me in marriage. Her father accepted my money and she fled before fulfilling that obligation. I've spent considerable time and resources tracking her down, and now that I've found her, I expect her to honor her commitment." Rose stepped forward, Jamie clutched against her chest, her fear transforming into fury. "I am not Rose Emerson anymore. I am Rose Jones. I am married. I have a child. Whatever agreement my father made with you is void and has been for years." Aldridge's eyes flickered to Jamie, and something ugly crossed his face. "I see you've been busy, living in sin, producing bastards." "My son is not a bastard," Rose said, her voice shaking with anger. "He is legitimate, born in wedlock, and you have no right to speak of him that way. You were pledged to me. Any marriage you entered into was fraudulent, as you were already contracted." "A contract to sell a human being is not legally binding," Ethan said, his own anger barely controlled. "And even if it were, Rose was under duress. She was coerced by her father's debts. No court would uphold such an agreement. We'll see what the territorial courts have to say about that. I'm prepared to file suit to make this very public and very ugly. I wonder how your employer will feel about his foreman being involved in such a scandal, how the town will feel about harboring a thief and a fraud." "The town knows my wife's story," Ethan said, though Rose knew this was stretching the truth. "And they've accepted her." "You have no power here, Aldridge. I have money. Money buys power anywhere." Aldridge pulled out a card and placed it on the porch railing. "I'm staying at the hotel. Rose has until tomorrow evening to come to her senses and agree to return with me to Kansas. If she doesn't, I'll proceed with legal action. And I promise you by the time I'm done, your reputation and your livelihood will be destroyed." He turned and walked away, leaving the card behind like a threat. Ethan picked it up and tore it in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces fall. But Rose knew destroying the card did not destroy the problem. That night they barely slept. Rose fed Jamie and put him to bed, then sat with Ethan at their small table, trying to figure out what to do. "He is right about one thing," Rose said miserably. "A scandal could hurt your position at the ranch. Maybe I should just go with him, get a divorce quietly somewhere, then come back." "Absolutely not. Rose, we're not separating. We're not giving him what he wants." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "We'll fight this legally. We'll get a lawyer, make our case. The law is on our side. The law favors men with money. You know that as well as I do. Then we'll find another way, but I'm not losing you, Rose. I'm not giving up on our family." The next morning, Ethan went to speak with Jack Jernigan, explaining the situation. Jack, to his credit, was sympathetic. "I suspected Mrs. Jones had run from something when she first came to town. Most people who end up in Tucumcari are running from something or looking for something. But she's proven herself since then, and so have you. I'll stand by you both." They also went to Miguel, who listened to the story with sad, knowing eyes. Men like this Aldridge, they think they own the world, but the world is bigger than their money. You fight, you keep your family together. "Maria and I, we stand with you too." Word spread through the town, as it inevitably did, and to Rose's surprise, more people rallied to their side than she had expected. Ellen Morrison organized the other ranch wives to write letters of character reference. Sarah Chen's husband, who had connections with the territorial government, offered to make inquiries about Aldridge's legal standing. Even the preacher, who had never fully approved of Rose, admitted in his sermon that Sunday that redemption was real and second chances were holy. But Aldridge was true to his word. He filed suit in the territorial court, claiming fraud and breach of contract. The case would be heard in 2 months, giving both sides time to prepare. Ethan hired a lawyer from Santa Fe, a sharp young woman named Catherine Wells who specialized in women's rights cases and who listened to Rose's story with fierce attention. "He doesn't have much of a legal leg to stand on," Catherine told them after reviewing the facts. "Contracts for marriage are complex, and in your case, there was clear coercion. Plus, you're legally married now, which supersedes any previous arrangement. But he's betting that a sympathetic judge and his money will swing things his way. We need to prove not just that the contract was invalid, but that honoring it would have caused you severe harm." The next 2 months were tense. Aldridge remained in Tucumcari, a dark presence that hung over their lives. He tried several times to speak with Rose directly, but Ethan or one of their friends always intercepted. He spread rumors, tried to turn public opinion against them, but found that the town, having finally accepted Rose, was not inclined to turn on her again. The trial was held in Santa Fe, requiring them to travel and leave Jamie with Martha, who had come from Texas specifically to help. Rose hated being separated from her son, but she knew it was necessary. The courtroom was intimidating, full of serious-faced men in dark suits, but Catherine Wells was a commanding presence, and Rose took strength from her confidence. Aldridge's lawyer painted Rose as a manipulative woman who had taken money under false pretenses, and then fled to avoid her obligations. He presented the contract her father had signed, showing the amount of money exchanged, arguing that Rose had benefited from those funds and therefore owed a debt. Catherine Wells dismantled his arguments methodically. She pointed out that Rose had been 21 at the time, legally an adult but economically powerless. She presented evidence of her father's gambling debts and alcoholism, establishing a pattern of coercion. She called witnesses who testified to Rose's character, to the life she had built in Tucumcari, to her marriage and motherhood. And she argued passionately that no contract that treated a human being as property could be considered valid under territorial law. When Rose took the stand, she told her story clearly and without embellishment. She spoke about her fear of Aldridge, about feeling like she had no choice, about the desperation that had driven her to run. She spoke about building a new life, about falling in love with Ethan, about the family they had created together. And when Aldridge's lawyer tried to shame her, to suggest she was a woman of loose morals, she looked him directly in the eye and said, "I made choices to save myself from a life that would have destroyed me. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud of the life I've built. I'm proud of the woman I've become." The judge, an older man with kind eyes, deliberated for less than an hour. When he returned, he ruled in Rose's favor. The contract was declared invalid due to coercion and the illegal nature of treating a person as property. Aldridge's suit was dismissed, and he was ordered to pay court costs. Furthermore, the judge issued a restraining order forbidding Aldridge from contacting Rose or her family in the future. Rose collapsed into Ethan's arms in relief, tears streaming down her face. It was over. Finally, truly over. Aldridge could not touch her, could not take her back, could not destroy the life she had built. She was free. They returned to Tucumcari as heroes of sorts. The town threw them a small celebration, acknowledging what they had been through and welcoming them back fully. Even those who had been hardest on Rose initially came to offer their congratulations and their apologies. It felt like a vindication, a final laying to rest of all the judgment and scorn she had endured. That fall, Ethan finalized the purchase of the 20 acres from Jack Jernigan. They began building their dream slowly. First a small barn for cattle, then a larger house with a real kitchen and separate bedrooms. Rose started her bakery in one corner of the house, selling bread and pies and cakes to appreciative customers. The business grew steadily, and within a year they were making enough profit to expand. Jamie grew into a bright, energetic toddler, then a curious little boy. He loved the ranch, loved helping his father with the cattle, loved his mother's baking. When he was 4, Rose gave birth to twin girls, Lily and Grace, who had their mother's red gold hair and their father's steady disposition. The house that had seemed so spacious suddenly felt wonderfully full of noise and life and love. Martha visited regularly, becoming a fixture in her grandchildren's lives. Miguel and his wife remained close friends, with Miguel teaching Jamie and later the twins about chickens and gardening. The community that had once scorned Rose now embraced her fully. She was Mrs. Jones, the baker, the rancher's wife, the woman who had faced down her past and won. Years passed, good years full of the ordinary joys and struggles of family life. The ranch prospered under Ethan's careful management. Rose's bakery became known throughout the territory, with people traveling from other towns to taste her famous apple pie and sourdough bread. They added on to the house as their family and their fortunes grew, creating a home that was warm and welcoming, always full of laughter. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Rose with a party. Their friends and family gathered, including Martha and Samuel, now married himself with children of his own. Miguel and his wife were there, as were the Morrisons and the Chens and what seemed like half of Tucumcari. As Rose looked around at all these people who had become her family, her community, her support, She felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Rose and Ethan sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. "Do you remember the first morning we met?" Rose asked, leaning against Ethan's shoulder. "Every detail. You were standing outside Miss Pritchard's shop, looking determined and defeated all at once. Most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. You bought all my eggs. Best decision I ever made." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "Started me on the path to this, to you, to our family, to this life. I was so scared back then, scared of everything, of everyone, scared to hope that things could be different. You weren't scared, you were brave. There's a difference." Rose smiled, tilting her face up to look at him. "We were both brave. You were brave enough to see past what everyone else thought, to take a chance on me. Not a chance, a certainty. I knew from the start you were worth it." Ethan's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together with the ease of a decade of practice. "And I was right." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, filling the vast New Mexico sky. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Around them, the land they had built stretched out, full of promise and possibility. And in Rose's heart, there was nothing but peace and contentment and love. Jamie grew up to be a fine young man, passionate about ranching like his father and with his mother's head for business. He eventually took over the operation of the ranch, expanding it and modernizing it while maintaining the values Ethan had instilled. The twins, Lily and Grace, were different as night and day despite being born minutes apart. Lily was adventurous and outgoing, eventually moving to Santa Fe to study law, inspired by Catherine Wells. Grace was quieter, artistic, and took over Rose's bakery, developing new recipes and expanding the business into something truly remarkable. As Ethan and Rose grew older, their hair turning silver, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived, they never forgot where they had started. They never forgot the morning when a scorned woman selling eggs met a cowboy who saw her worth. They told the story to their grandchildren, who listened with wide eyes, learning the lesson that kindness and courage could change everything, that love was worth fighting for, and that the best things in life often came from the unlikeliest of beginnings. Rose kept her basket, the one she had carried all those years ago, now old and worn. It sat on a shelf in their home, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. Sometimes, when she was feeling nostalgic, she would take it down and run her fingers over the weathered wood, remembering. Ethan built them a bench, a sturdy thing of oak and iron, and placed it on the highest point of their property. They would sit there together in the evenings, holding hands, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and rose, talking or simply being together in the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. When Ethan was 70, he told Rose, "I'd buy those eggs all over again, every single one, every single morning, forever if I could." And Rose, looking at the man who had saved her by seeing her, who had loved her when she could not love herself, who had built a life with her more beautiful than anything she had ever dreamed possible, replied, "I'd sell them to you, forever if I could." They had 16 more good years together after that conversation, years filled with great-grandchildren and continued success, and the deep satisfaction of a life fully lived. When Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep at 86, Rose grieved deeply, but without regret. They had given each other everything, had held nothing back, had loved completely. Rose lived another 3 years after Ethan, still sharp and active, still running her fingers over that old basket and remembering. She spent her final years surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories, sharing wisdom. and making sure they all understood the most important truth she had learned: that every person deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be loved, and that sometimes the smallest act of kindness, like buying a basket of eggs, can change the entire trajectory of a life. When Rose passed away at 89, the entire town of Tucumcari mourned. She had become a legend, the woman who had arrived alone and scorned and had built an empire of family and community and love. At her funeral, held on a clear spring day, her eldest grandson James spoke about his grandmother's courage, about how she had faced down her past and built a future worth living. He spoke about the power of second chances and the importance of seeing people for who they truly are rather than what society tells us they should be. And somewhere in the crowd of mourners, a young woman stood listening, alone and frightened, new to town and already feeling the weight of judgment. She clutched a small bag of possessions and wondered if she had made a mistake in coming here, if she would ever find a place where she belonged. As she turned to leave, an older gentleman approached, one of Rose's great-grandsons who had inherited his great-grandfather's steady gray eyes. "Miss, are you all right? You look lost." The young woman hesitated, then shook her head. "I am fine, I should go." "You're new to Tucumcari, aren't you?" "Well, welcome. This town has a long memory, but it also has a good heart once you get past the prickly exterior. If you need any help settling in, any of the Jones family would be happy to assist. That's what my great-grandmother would have wanted. She believed in helping people find their way." The young woman looked at him, saw the genuine offer in his eyes, and felt something loosen in her chest. "Thank you. That is very kind." As she walked away, feeling slightly less alone, slightly more hopeful, the legacy of Rose and Ethan Jones lived on. Not just in the thriving ranch and successful bakery, not just in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren they had produced, but in the simple truth they had lived: that everyone deserves a second chance, that love can heal the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is see someone when the rest of the world has turned blind. The story of the woman who sold eggs door to door in a town that scorned her, and the cowboy who bought everyone, became a legend in Tucumcari. It was told and retold, embellished and remembered, passed down through generations as a reminder of what was possible when kindness met courage, when love overcame judgment, when two people decided that their future mattered more than her past. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all. Not the land or the business or even the family, though all of those were precious, but the idea that had taken root in a small New Mexico town that cold October morning in 1883, when a cowboy looked at a scorned woman and saw not a scandal or a mystery, but simply a person deserving of basic human dignity. That idea had grown and spread, changing hearts and minds, making Tucumcari a place where second chances were possible and redemption was real. The old basket still exists, preserved now in a small museum dedicated to the town's history. Next to it is a photograph of Rose and Ethan on their 50th wedding anniversary, standing in front of their ranch house, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Rose is holding the basket, and Ethan's arm is around her waist, and they are both smiling with the kind of joy that comes only from a life fully lived and deeply loved. Visitors to the museum read the placard explaining the significance of the basket, learn the story of Rose and Ethan Jones, and often leave with tears in their eyes and warmth in their hearts. Because it is a story that transcends time and place, a story that speaks to the fundamental human need to be seen and valued and loved. It is a story that reminds us that our past does not have to define our future, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes Love begins with the simplest of gestures. In Tucumcari, New Mexico, where the desert meets the sky and the wind carries stories across the endless miles, the tale of Rose and Ethan is more than history. It is a living testament to the power of compassion, the strength of commitment, and the transformative nature of love. It is a reminder that we all carry baskets of some kind, burdens we hope someone will help us bear, and that the most beautiful thing we can do is reach out and say, "I'll take everyone." And so the story ends where it began, with eggs and a basket and a choice to see beyond what others see. But it also ends with so much more, with love and family and community and legacy. It ends with the certainty that Rose and Ethan's love story, which started with a simple transaction on a dusty street in 1883, became something that would outlive them both, inspiring generations to come to choose kindness over judgment, love over fear, and hope over despair. Their grave sits on the highest point of the ranch they built together, under the wide New Mexico sky they both loved. The headstone is simple granite, bearing their names and dates in a single line. They saw each other clearly. And every morning, as the sun rises over the land they tamed together, it illuminates their resting place, a golden light that seems to promise that love like theirs never truly dies but lives on in every kind word, every second chance given, every moment when one person chooses to see another's worth. The eggs are long gone, scattered across years and meals and memories. But what they represented, the connection they created, the love story they started, remains eternal. In the hearts of their descendants, in the culture of the town they helped shape, in the example they set for how to live with courage and love with abandon, Rose and Ethan Jones are immortal. And perhaps, on quiet mornings when the light is just right, and the desert wind carries whispers of the past, you can almost see them still. A young woman with a basket of eggs and her head held high, a cowboy with steady gray eyes and an open heart, meeting on a dusty street in Tucumcari, and beginning a love story that would last through all eternity.